Welcome to Voices of Experience. In the next half hour, we'll examine the role of public workers, both active and retired, in the economy of the state of Minnesota. I'm Dan Mikel, President Emeritus of the Minnesota State Retiree Council, AFL-CIO, and our two guests today are Eliot Seide, the Executive Director of AFSCME Council 5, and Jennifer Mundt, the Public Affairs Director. I have your title correct?
You do.
And Jennifer and Eliot, welcome to Voices of Experience.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate being here.
Okay, Eliot, first question to you. We are very familiar with the Arizona shooting spree that happened in early January that killed 6 and critically wounded a member of Congress. Do you feel that anti-government rhetoric is instigating violence and inflaming hatred of public workers?
I think we have a real problem in this country, not just with the rhetoric, but with the policies of the extreme right. But to the rhetoric question specifically, when you see people like Sarah Palin putting crosshairs on congressional targets through the sights of a rifle gun, when you hear Tim Pawlenty, as quoted in the Los Angeles Times, saying to Republican governors that public employee unions would put a shiv into any Republican governor, that kind of violent language certainly contributes to an environment, a negative environment. Then you add on that the complete bashing of public workers and people who serve government, and the bashing of government that's been going on in this country under Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Tim Pawlenty. That adds to a disrespect for government, disrespect for people who deliver vital public services, and creates a very negative, dangerous environment.
So what we need is a civil discourse.
We need civil discourse and policies that say government service and working for government is a life worth living, and service is important to our nation and to our communities.
Jennifer, who are public workers? What services do they provide, and why is their work important?
Well, Dan, we're your friends, your neighbors, and your customers. We're the blue-collar workers who take care of your hometown. We're the snowplow drivers who dig you out. Yeah. We feed grandma in the nursing homes. We staff the emergency rooms when you're sick. And we're the folks who help minds soar in schools, colleges, and libraries.
Okay, now with AFSCME, the American Federation of State Council and Municipal Employees, how many public and not profit workers are there in the state of Minnesota that are represented by AFSCME Council 5?
Well, we're a union of 43,000 workers throughout Minnesota, and we advocate for 3 things. We advocate for excellence in public service, dignity in the workplace, and opportunity and prosperity for all workers.
Now, Eliot, with public employees, being the forefront of our discussion, how are they facing similar challenges as union members in the private sector are?
Well, I think we're facing very similar problems. The cheap labor conservatives like Tim Pawlenty, like right now some of the leaders of the Minnesota legislature want to drive down wages, benefits for all workers. They try to pit public sector workers against private sector workers. We're all facing layoffs. We're all facing cutbacks in our wages. We're all facing diminishment of our benefits. And just yesterday, as a matter of fact, some leaders of the Minnesota legislature placed a constitutional amendment into action that would call for this state to become a right to work for less state. And any state where this type of amendment is passed, workers make less money, they have less benefits, schools and education are worse, healthcare is less affordable and less available. So private sector workers and public sector workers are facing the challenge of maintaining our standard of living as we're being attacked by extreme right-wingers. At the same time, corporate profits are at record levels.
Yeah. Now you're talking about money, and I was raised at a time when people didn't talk much about how much they made or how much other people made. So I'm a little bit reluctant to ask about specific questions, but there are some myths out there and about compensation for public workers. And I really think we do have to talk about them.
Sure.
Is it true, as some claim, that public workers are overpaid?
Well, no, we're not overpaid. The average AFSCME member makes $38,000 a year. The average Minnesotan makes $42,000 a year. We have traded, over the years, traded wages for good benefits. It's been a trade that we've made through the collective bargaining process, and we've given up wages for that. In fact, national studies have shown that on average, the public sector makes 4% less than the private sector when you consider equal education and capacity. So it's a complete myth that public sector workers' wages and benefits are in excess of private sector workers.
Jennifer, then the public sector workers are really not better off than private sector workers. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true. Like Eliot said, multiple studies say that government workers in Minnesota earn 4% less than their counterparts in the private sector. Now, the more skilled a worker is in government, the greater the wage penalty is. So, complete myth that we're paid more than people in the private sector.
So, Eliot, do public workers, because of their numbers and because of their $38,000 average salary, do they drag down the economy?
No, that's one of the great myths. I mean, public sector workers, people who make on average $38,000 a year, like AFSCME members do, buy necessities, not luxuries. Every time you cut a public worker job, Main Street loses a customer. And that's particularly true to our neighbors and friends in greater Minnesota. Look, public workers are your neighbors, they're your taxpayers, they're your friends. They're the people in the community who take care of important vital services. And the money that gets spent in communities helps those businesses in those communities thrive and survive. If you lay off a public worker or cut their wages, you're cutting off someone who's buying necessities, not luxuries. And I think that's a very critical point.
So we all do better when we all do better.
Paul Wellstone's point, and there's no doubt about that. We don't understand the economic theory that says that if you pile on public sector layoffs and cut demand more, that somehow you're going to get people back to work. Obviously, the people who are putting that out, people like Phil Krinke from the Taxpayers League and David Strom, obviously I assume they failed Economics 101 because it just doesn't work like that.
Okay. Jennifer, as we speak, in early 2011, the state legislature is in session, and we're tackling the legacy of the Pawlenty administration, which is a $6.2 billion shortfall. If every single employee, every single public employee were fired, how much of a shortfall would there still be?
Well, Dan, hypothetically, you wouldn't want to do it, but if every state employee were fired, it would erase only 21% of the state's $6.2 billion deficit. What that tells you is we're not the problem, but we have become a convenient scapegoat for politicians who don't want to take responsibility for their budget mess.
It sounds good, but it's not going to solve any problems.
That's right. And if you send all of us home, that means that the snow gets deeper and there's no snowplow driver. There's nobody there to teach your kid in the schools. There's nobody there to help you when you're sick.
And just want to add to that the viewers should know that Minnesota's state government is the 10th leanest in the nation. There's only 71 public workers for every 10,000 residents. And if you look at the U.S. Census, that makes us equivalent to conservative Florida. So we know that we get great public services in Minnesota. Our roads get cleared, our parks are beautiful, our lakes get stocked, and we know that when we turn the tap on in the morning that we're not going to be poisoned. And that's because we have very productive, efficient public workers. But we're the 10th leanest in the nation, and viewers should know that.
Okay. During the 8 years of Tim Pawlenty as governor, did the state workforce grow or shrink?
Oh, it most definitely shrunk. Just AFSCME membership alone dropped by nearly 1,600 people, 1,600 people who have lost their jobs or their jobs have been eliminated in the 8 years of Pawlenty. and state government, the state government as a share of the economy in Minnesota has shrunk consistently by any statistic that you look at over the 8 years of Pawlenty. So the notion that government's been growing in Minnesota is not true, and in fact we have lost just AFSCME 1,600 jobs in state service and thousands of public sector jobs throughout the state.
So those public sector employees are not buying a car from their local car dealer. They're not going to their grocery store in any great numbers to buy things beyond the basic necessities, and they're not getting clothing as often as they would. As often as they may like. So
Absolutely.
Really,
I mean,
the whole economy suffers.
You know, absolutely. And you know, the Chamber of Commerce is fond of saying we've got to cut public workers. Again, the Chamber's friends in the legislature yesterday introduced a bill that would cut state government by 15%. That's 7,500 workers more would lose their jobs. And again, to the Chamber of Commerce, you have businesses that you represent. I want to say this to the Chamber, that every time that you lay off a public worker, Main Street in Minnesota loses a customer. And again, if the Chamber doesn't understand that, then it just, I guess, doesn't understand economics.
Okay. Now let's shift a little bit. This program is brought to our viewers by the Minnesota State Retiree Council, AFL-CIO. So let's talk about retirees and pensions. There's been a lot of critical comments by conservative politicians such as former Governor Pawlenty and others of his ilk that public employee pensions are somehow extravagant. And we hear these same comments by the new conservatives coming into the state legislature. Jennifer, how much does the average AFSCME retiree receive in pension benefits?
Dan, AFSCME retirees have an average pension of about $13,000. That's a modest pension. There's a notion out there that if you don't have it, then they shouldn't have it. Mm-hmm. Contrary to that, we believe everyone should have a retirement that allows them to live with dignity.
Mm-hmm. Eliot, how's this $13,200 pension determined? I mean, some people will probably get more than that, I assume, and there'll be others who are getting less than that average.
Yeah, in a defined benefit pension, you know what you're paying in, but you can predict what you'll get out, and it's done on a formula basis. So, in the case of the Minnesota pension system, you multiply 1.7% times years of service of your high 5 highest paid years, and that's how you come up with the $13,000. The average $13,000 that Jennifer talks about. And obviously it'll be more for people who make more, less for people who make less, but that's the formula, 1.7 times years of service of your 5 highest years.
Okay. Not to be too technical, but you mentioned the phrase defined benefit type of pension. I know that there are also people who receive the defined contribution type of pension. What is the difference between the defined benefit and defined contribution?
Well, I think we can both talk to this, but the defined contribution plan, you know what you're paying in, but you have no idea what you'll get out at the end because the market determines completely what you'll get.
The stock market.
Stock market.
Yeah, okay.
Stock market. Defined benefit, you know what you're paying in, but again, it's formula driven on what you get out at the end. And I want to. This is really important. In defined benefit pensions, the employees pay into the plan. It's not that the employees aren't paying part of their salary. They're paying in. These are really deferred wages that are taken out of your wages, paid into the pension plan, so that when you retire, you have an opportunity with dignity and respect. It's amazing to me that defined contribution is looked at as a viable pension plan. When you look what happened at some of the large companies around this country, Enron in Texas being the most famous of people's